Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my Total War Warhammer 2 Legendary Lord lore video on Mazdamundi. Now, a quick caveat before we get things started, guys. If you've already seen my likely Legendary Lords video for the Lizardmen, then you would have seen most, if not all, of the information that's about to feature in this video. But I wanted to separate out some of the lore for Mazdamundi for those who are just interested in hearing about Mazdamundi by himself. So if you've seen that, feel free to skip this video and stay tuned for the next one. For those of you who are staying with us, welcome to the Mazdamundi video. In order to cover a bit of the lore about Mazdamundi, the Slann mage priest for the Lizardmen and probably the leader of the faction in Total War Warhammer 2, we have to delve into a bit of the history about the creation of the Lizardmen and where they're currently standing in the history of things and the way of the Warhammer world. So to kick things off, we're going to go a little bit into what we call the Old Ones. The Old Ones were a spacefaring race who supposedly came to the Warhammer world and started to terraform it, essentially, making it more habitable and really just launching their own unknowable plans for the Warhammer world into action. They supposedly changed the alignment of the planet to move it closer to the sun, warming it, melting most of the ice that was covering the planet at the time, really making it a habitable planet for life. Now, in the midst of this terraforming, they needed some servants to do their bidding, to help them with their grand plans for this new world. And as such, they created the Lizardmen. The first of these species to be created was a species known as the Slann. Now, Mazdamundi is one of these Slann, but he wasn't one of the first generation of Slann. So the Old Ones go about creating these servants. They create the Slann, who are the only creatures said to be able to withstand being in direct contact with the Old Ones and be able to even converse or begin to understand what the Old Ones are trying to communicate, what they're saying. They're the only ones with enough intellect to even begin to grasp some of what the Old Ones want to have happen. And along with this prodigious intellect, the Slann have a huge innate magic ability as well, and are the most powerful magic users in the Warhammer universe. So once the Old Ones built the Slann, of which Mazdamundi was amongst them, they had to set about kind of building their cities and really setting up the way they want the world to function. So what they got the Slann to do was to build these cities on geographical ley lines, essentially. And this allowed the Slann to tap into the kind of energy of the world in something known as the geomantic web, which essentially allowed the Slann and magic users in these places to tap into the energy of the world, making them even more powerful, and allowing them to communicate with each other telepathically if they're at these sort of sites of power. As you can see on this map, some of the cities are built on these crosses, all of the cities in fact, and these are meant to be the signs of those ley lines. And some of the elven cities match up with these lines. I've not seen a world map that I was able to show you guys in terms of what cities do line up with these geographic ley lines. But essentially the Lizardmen built these cities all over the Warhammer world. Eventually the Old Ones started to uplift some other species as well. First was the primitive species, which would go on to become the Elves. The Old Ones elevated them, so they became what we know as the Elves today. The Slann taught the Elves all their magic. Then it was the Dwarves, the humans, and then finally the halflings and the ogres. And so the Old Ones are sort of going along with their worldly plans, and the Lizardmen start to worship them. They start to worship what's known as the Great Plan, which is the plan all these Old Ones have for the world. The Slann aren't exactly privy to all the ideas of it, but they just sort of do what they're told, but they know there is a plan. For sure there's a plan. So the Slann are doing what the Old Ones want, and in the process of building all these cities and all these constructions and elevating species, the Old Ones build 2 portals at either pole of the world to allow them to teleport essentially to other planets or other realms. However, at one point what the Lizardmen would name as the Great Catastrophe occurred, where these gates at the poles exploded and chaos burst into the world, warp energy flew into the sky and eventually became the moon Morsleb. There was warpstone dust everywhere, magic energy filled the entirety of the world, chaos energy filled the entirety of the world. Now, when this great catastrophe occurred, the magical backlash was of such ferocity that it shredded the minds and killed over half of the Slann that existed in the world at that time. Demons popped into being all over the Warhammer world, and they set about trying to destroy everything the Old Ones had built. They marched on the Lizardmen, marched on their temple cities, set about trying to just absolutely slaughter everything that was around. The Old Ones, for their part, had departed just before the Great Catastrophe, simply saying thanks for all the fish, leaving the Slann and the rest of the Lizardmen slightly rudderless. Their leaders had left, they didn't really know what to do, their magic was a powerful weapon against these chaos forces, and indeed, they would cause absolute devastation, raining down fireballs on chaos, opening up huge chasms in the world, moving around tectonic plates to destroy chaos armies, causing tidal waves, floods, just absolutely devastating magic of which the likes of the world has not really seen since, because the Slann are at the height of their power. But such were the overwhelming numbers of these chaos hordes that no matter what sort of they rained down upon them, these chaos hordes just kept coming. The chaos hordes attacked temple cities, the Slann put up barriers to protect themselves, they enchanted jungle around their temple cities to be horrible, vile, and deadly places with insects that would kill, floods, quicksand, thorny carnivorous plants that would act as a natural defense. They rerouted rivers to provide defenses as well against these chaos hordes, filled them with flesh-eating piranhas, everything they could think of to defend themselves against this oncoming tide. This war stretched out for millennia. During this time, Lord Croak, who was leading the Slann as he was the oldest of the Slann and in the first generation, was teaching other Slann like Mazdamundi himself the ways of the world, the ways of magic. Now at this point in the story, it's worth bearing in mind that once the Old Ones left the Warhammer world, there were no more new Slann mage priests. And of the existing Slann mage priests that were still alive and survived the backlash of the Great Catastrophe, only a few of them still standing had ever really spoken to the Old Ones. So you have a whole generation of Slann mage priests, including Mazdamundi, who hasn't actually ever met or spoken to an Old One. So they were forced to learn from other Slann mage priests like Lord Croak. Together the Slann put up a noble defense. However, just the extreme tides of chaos were just unstoppable, and temple cities began to fall, and the Lizardmen were fought back to really their last bastions of power in the southern areas of the Warhammer world. After this millennia of war, the Lizardmen were losing forces, but eventually it was an elf by the name of Kalidor Dragon Tamer who came up with the idea of the Vortex, which would eventually suck all the excess chaos energy out of the world. Now, it's said that Kalidor went on travels around the world before he established this Vortex spell, and he went to the dwarves and he met Grimnir who helped him out of it, and I've heard people tell me that the Lizardmen had something to do with Kalidor Dragon Tamer learning the Vortex spell as well, but I wasn't able to find a direct reference to that. If you guys know where I might find that, do drop it in the comments. But there is a possibility that Kalidor learned, because all elves learnt their magic from the Lizardmen anyway, there's a possibility that Kalidor learned some of the Vortex spell from the Lizardmen, but if the Lizardmen knew it, why didn't they do it themselves? I'm not 100% sure on that myself, but let me know in the comments if you do know. But what I know is that Kalidor learned this spell and he initiated the Vortex in Ulthuan, the home of the High Elves. And it worked. For a time, the Vortex began to suck in all the chaos energy from the Warhammer world. The Lizardmen, sensing what was going on through their geomantic web, this web that kind of lets them know what's going on around the world through the ley lines, were like, oh, this is a brilliant idea, guys. We have to back him up. And it said that the elf spell would have failed almost immediately if it wasn't for all the Slann pouring all their energy through the geomantic web to reinforce the magic of the elves, to make sure that the Vortex held, that the Vortex worked, and indeed it did. And almost instantaneously, all the excess chaos magic was sucked out of the Warhammer world. And demons, which kind of need this aura of chaos magic to be able to manifest themselves in the Warhammer world, could no longer sustain their corporal forms and disappeared back into the warp or the realm of chaos, whichever you prefer to call it. And so the day was saved. Chaos was greatly reduced, if not defeated entirely, on that day when the Vortex went up. So the Slann helped maintain the Vortex, But their once proud empire that spanned the entirety of the world had been absolutely decimated. They were just left with the small pockets of civilization they had remaining in this enchanted jungle that they'd made a ferocious and deadly place to live for their own defense. And once the dust settled, the oldest living Slan still alive was, in fact, Mazdamundi, who is the legendary lord we're discussing. Sorry, went on a bit of a general discussion there, but needed to give you guys a bit of background in terms of who Mazdamundi is, where he comes from, and a bit of his own history. So Mazdamundi at this point is the oldest surviving Slan mage priest, and essentially that makes him the kind of de facto leader of the Lizardmen. In the aftermath of the Great Catastrophe and the war against chaos, the Lizardmen begin to rebuild. So Mazdamundi begins to lead a bit of a reconstruction effort. Now, not a reconstruction effort of the entirety of their previous empire, but really just of the cities within Lustria. They were like, okay, let's try and rebuild what we can, salvage what we can. But we're in a lot of trouble here. The old ones left us. We don't know why, but we still believe in their great plan. They must know what they want us to do. And indeed, they found a number of plaques written either on stone or gold that were kind of like instructions that the old ones left behind in the individual temple cities. The problem was that a lot of the temple cities had been lost or had been ruined, and these plaques had gone missing, and the Lizardmen were left essentially with an incomplete instruction manual of what to do in the world next. And they also found themselves not as powerful as they once were. Some of the rites and rituals and magics they used to be able to do every day, no problem, they began to forget. So some of their most powerful spells, they began to forget how to do them without the old one's guidance. They couldn't retain that knowledge. So Mazdamundi and the other Slan Mage priests start to lead the reconstruction effort, and the Lizardmen go on to rebuild a lot of their old temple cities, and they are still quite splendid when you see them, with towering pyramids of worship and just really quite cool, very Aztec inspired, I'm sure if you haven't guessed already, very Aztec inspired constructions. During this rebuilding effort, the Lizardmen really kind of withdraw from the world. They're not the teachers, they're not the kind of guides that they once were. Without the guidance of the old ones themselves, they may feel a bit insecure in that role. And so they kind of leave the other races to kind of just get on with their own thing for a number of thousands of years. And they're keeping an eye on it. They still have, although many areas of the geomantic web have been lost, they still manage to keep an eye on the world and what's going on with what they have remaining. After a lot of this reconstruction effort goes on, the Slan themselves, once the immediate recovery has taken place, begin to withdraw into what's known as a kind of trance-like state, a cerebral way of thinking. They go into a trance, they start pondering all the machinations of the world, maybe playing the odds, trying to calculate what's going to happen in the future, trying to interpret what the old ones want them to do as part of the plan. And essentially it just results for anyone who's not a Slan Mage priest as appearing as they go to sleep. For hundreds of years at a time. They kind of doze off and they're unreachable and they're not really actively leading. That role kind of fell to the skink priests to lead the day-to-day goings-on of the Lizardmen Empire. Another interesting point to bear in mind is that the Slan Mage priests have the ability to kind of telepathically link with skinks. And this telepathic link allows Slan Mage priests to experience the world through the skink's eyes. So if a skink's seeing something and needs to alert the Slan Mage priest, they can tap into the geomantic web and they can connect their minds that way, with the Slan Mage priest seeing everything the skink can see. The Slan were really, at this stage in their history, only really called upon when there was an emergency, and the skinks would try to wake them up, and sometimes they just wouldn't wake up for years. So it was a bit of a, not exactly leading from the front there, or from the Slan Mage priest. They kind of just fell away into isolationism, and indeed the Lizardmen themselves became quite isolationist in their own right. Mazdamundi himself made his home in the temple city of Hexoatl, which is just here. It's the northernmost city of the Lizardmen Empire, bordering a lot of other civilizations, and really at the forefront of the Lizardmen's defense. It has a mountain range to its north, and one of the famous incidents of Mazdamundi being awoken to help defend the Lizardmen Empire was when they were facing a huge invasion from the Dark Elves. who were looking to learn some of their magics, really exploit their knowledge, and probably just take some more slaves, really, if I'm honest. That's kind of the Dark Elf style. Raid, pillage, take slaves, steal magic, let's go Dark Elves. And so Mazdamundi woke up from his slumber or his trance or his cerebral thinking or whatever you want to call it. And he said, all right, screw this. And he made the mountain range to the north sentient. As in, he made it a living mountain range, which would go on to be known as the Grey Guardians, which would go on to block and I think potentially kill and maim any armies that were trying to get to the Lizardmen. So that would be a fascinating thing to see in Total War Warhammer in terms of a sentient living mountain range. I have no idea how they are going to implement that, but that's a particularly cool aspect of the Warhammer world that and shows Mazdamundi's power and what he's able to do. But the Dark Elves weren't the only ones invading Lustria. There was a huge war with the Greenskins. There was a war with Skaven. Men had begun to discover it indeed in 1492 of the imperial calendar. Marco Colombo, just as you may guess, just two names smudged together there from our own history. Marco Colombo discovered Lustria for humankind, as it were. And that began a series of kind of small expeditions into Lustria, but none that really aggravated the Lizardmen to any degree. They just kind of let it go. However, in the year 1944, that changed. And after Mazdamundi had sort of brought the mountains back to life, he went back to sleep for like another 400 or 500 years. He wasn't like, he's not the most active chap over the course of the entire history of the Warhammer world. But when he does get up, he does do some extraordinary things. So Mazdamundi had been asleep, and a human expedition arrived in the year 1944 of the imperial calendar. So around 1500 years before the current Total War Warhammer timeline. And this was led by a chap called El Kadavo. And El Kadavo was a mercenary captain, I think out of Tilia or Ostalia. I can't remember exactly which one, but one of those two. And he overtook one of the ruined temple cities and claimed it for himself. Now, Mazdamundi was kind of, the skinks were like, oh my god, we've got invaders, we better wake Mazdamundi. So they went to Mazdamundi, please boss, we've got intruders, what should we do? And Mazdamundi kind of just barely wakes up and goes, just get rid of them. And so the Lizardmen go and they fight off the El Kadavo. So El Kadavo flees this city, the temple city, which he renamed Kadavo, after himself, of course. And so he fled off. And they were like, okay, that's done. And then a few years later, he just came back. And they were like, oh, God, Mazdamundi, what do we do? He's like, look, we just get rid of him. I told you before. Stop waking me up. And this had been the second time in nearly a decade that he'd been waken up, which for a Slan Mage Priest is a blink of an eye. It's no time at all. He was like, what is going on? Twice in a decade? What are you doing, skinks? Just take care of it. So they go again and they lead an army of Lizardmen and they chase off El Kadavo. And after a few years, he comes back yet again, third time, reestablishes Kadavo in the same ruined temple city. And the skinks again go to Mazdamundi, boss, he's back. What should we do? And Mazdamundi's like, right, fuck this. This guy's what's happening here? And he kind of reads the stars and does his super intellectual thinking and does the math and says, look, if I don't deal with this once and for all, this guy's going to keep waking me up. And I want to try and get some sleep or get some thinking done and meditate. So he's ruining my meditation time. So I'm going to go fuck his shit up. So Mazdamundi's like, okay, put me on the back of a stegodon, which is essentially a huge dinosaur. So they put his throne on the back of a stegodon, and Mazdamundi goes to war. So Mazdamundi goes to the city of Kadavo that El Kadavo had named after himself, and essentially just moves the tectonic plates underneath the city, causing the entire ruins to collapse, everything the humans had built to collapse on top of them, and essentially just crushing an entire army of human mercenaries in one foul swoop. And then Mazdamundi is like, all right, I'm up now. Let's do this. So Mazdamundi, from that point on, begins to take a much more active participation in the world. That crushing of a human army kind of got his juices going. He got his flow going. It's like, all right, okay, I'm up. Let's do some stuff. What's the world like at the moment? I've been sitting thinking for a while. I'll be a bit more active in the world as it stands. Now, Mazdamundi was the first of the priests to become more active than they'd been in over a millennia. During this time, some of the other Slan Mage priests had begun to awake, And they kind of had the sense that something was going on, something was up in the world at the moment. And during this time, something was up in the world at the moment, so all the Slan mage priests begin to take a much more active role, including Mazdamundi, the eldest, and really kind of the de facto leader of the Slan mage priests, although technically most of them really just take care of their own temple cities, and that's the way they tend to run things. So, now with most of the Slan mage priests being slightly more active than they used to be, which isn't saying a lot particularly, a lot of them had been roused by these nightmares of chaos returning. And indeed, this was around the time of the Great Chaos War in the Empire. But it said the Lizardmen, although they didn't participate directly in that war, at any one point, over half of the existing Slan mage priests, including Mazdamundi himself, were working behind the scenes to try and increase the defenses of the world against chaos magics. And it said that without the efforts of the Lizardmen, the armies that the Empire faced in the Great War of Chaos would have been 10 times, if not 100 times the size it was, if it wasn't for their interference and how they managed to limit the amount of magic, limiting the power of the Chaos Wizards, and limiting the amount of demons that could appear in corporeal form in the great Chaos Horde that was descending from the north. And so they continued this kind of active patrol, looking to continue to strengthen the Vortex when they felt it weakening. So a lot of behind-the-scenes work from Mazdamundi and the Slan Mage Priests. And in reality, this is because the Lizardmen were retconned into the Warhammer world. So you kind of have to have them doing things behind the scenes, because where were they during all these great events in the Warhammer world as they'd been described previously? But that's essentially the reasoning for why they're more often than not behind the scenes rather than actively participating in any war. The Slan Mage Priests are doing their decreasing chaos magical thing, and they feel a disturbance off their own western coast. And what this essentially is a group of Norse marauders have come down from the north to an area of Lustria known as the Turtle Islands, and they've really taken over an ancient Old One shrine known as the Golden Ziggurat. Now, the Golden Ziggurat is an Old One sort of shrine and pyramid with a lot of Old One technology stroke magic there, and they unleashed a sort of huge boon of power which they couldn't really understand, essentially decoupling that site from the geomantic web, or the access to the geomantic web as the Slan mage priests had at the time. It effectively killed all of the Norse marauders itself. But one of the lucky coincidences from this entire incident was that in sort of ransacking this temple, the marauders had unearthed some of these golden plaques that the Old One's instructions had been written on, and these golden plaques were brought back to Lustria to be studied by the Slan Mage Priests. Now, Lord Mazdamundi is the foremost authority on the writings of the Old Ones and the Great Plan, and so he began to study these plaques intently. However, around this same time, a huge invading army of Dark Elves and Chaos began to swoop down on Lustria itself from the north. Now, being the northernmost temple city and really the first line of defense from any kind of northern aggression, Mazdamundi's City of Hexoatl was the first to be hit. Now, a fantastically named character who exists in the lore of the Beastmen, called, I hope I'm getting the pronunciation right, but if I'm not, I really don't care, because I'm going to call him this anyway, is Tic-Tac-Toe. Now, Tic-Tac-Toe was the head of the Pterodon Riders, which is essentially the pterodactyl riders of the Lizardmen in Hexoatl. Now, he started to scout out, and because the defenses, the Dark Elves and the Chaos had somehow managed to subvert the natural kind of waystone-like defenses, they're called Sentinel Stones, I think, for the Lizardmen rather than waystones, much like the Wood Elves. The Sentinel Stone defenses, they'd managed to enter into Lustria largely undetected, but it was Tic-Tac-Toe on his Pterodon scouting around the area that managed to spot this army first, and he immediately rode back to Hexoatl to tell Mazdamundi. However, Mazdamundi wasn't there. So Tic-Tac-Toe was de facto in charge because there was no one more senior than him around Hexoatl at the time. So Tic-Tac-Toe bravely, a little skink that he is, begins to launch a defense of Hexoatl and starts to hit this marching Chaos and Dark Elf army with hit and run tactics with him and his Pterodon riders, dropping rocks on their heads, ambushing them whenever they get an opportunity, really just harassing and haranguing them all the way to the temple city itself. However, he wasn't able to stop them, he just didn't have the forces. So he locks the doors and they begin the siege of Hexoatl. And this siege goes on for several months. The Lizardmen are just barely holding on. This is a significant force. During this siege, Chaos had deployed horrible creations that the Lizardmen had never seen before. War machines that had managed to entrap demon souls, launched with devastating effect against the temple city itself. A lot of the leading parties, a lot of the leading generals who would normally be leading the army of Hexoatl aren't there, and Tic-Tac-Toe is really just trying to do his best, and he puts up a valiant effort and indeed holds out for several months. And just as the defensive are about to be breached, the mud, the sort of puddles of mud around the Chaos and Dark Elf camp begin to, shudder. Boom, boom, boom. And ripples start to appear in these little puddles. And they're like, what on earth is going on? And none other than the great champion of the Lizardmen on his enormous Carnosaur, which is essentially like a slightly smaller T-Rex, burst out of the jungle and start to munch down on the squishy Dark Elves and armor-plated Chaos Warriors. Him and his dinosaur and the enormous host they were leading fall upon the Chaos Hordes and start to engage in battle. Not only that, from the other side of the jungle, another enormous Lizardmen host led by none other than Mazdamundi himself. And once Mazdamundi arrived, he opened up a huge chasm in the earth that's said to have swallowed half of the Chaos Hordes almost immediately. Him on his Stegodon, on his throne, starts to rain down all kinds of devastating magics on this Chaos Horde, and they just charge in, fighting all the hordes of Chaos at once. Krokgar, Mazdamundi, completely wrecking this host of Chaos and Dark Elves who dared to lay siege to a temple city of the Lizardmen. Absolutely terrifying. If you ask me to fight dinosaur creatures, I'd be shitting my pants, as I imagine many of the Chaos Warriors were as well. So they managed to fight off this Chaos herd in a famous victory amongst the Lizardmen, just absolutely annihilating the hordes of Chaos, the old enemy, and really doing it very thoroughly and efficiently. After the dust settled, it said a 20-mile ring around the city was just completely flattened and annihilated. That's how devastating the battle was. After this battle, Mazdamundi had come back and he'd said, sorry guys, I wasn't here, I wasn't home, I wasn't here to help out, I apologize, but I was away translating these plaques or understanding these plaques. And what I've taken is that the great plan, which we've all been waiting for all this millennia, is essentially on hold, and we won't be able to do anything about it until we can rid the world of all of the forces that the old ones did not intend to take part in the great plan. So that's the forces of Chaos, the Skaven, the Beastmen. We have to eradicate them all from the surface of the world before the great plan can even pick up again. So this is our sacred mission as Lizardmen, to rid the world. So essentially Mazdamundi comes back from his translation. It's like, right guys, so genocide's the answer. That's what we're going for. But it's genocide against bad guys, so that's cool, right? And everyone, all of this men like, yeah, let's bite some Chaos heads off. Let's do it. So this is the Lizardmen' renewed purpose. Now that most of the Slan Mage priests are awake and active, or at least slightly awake and active, still just sitting about, not doing much, but now that they're mostly awake and active, they are launching a crusade against all the forces that the old ones did not intend to have take part in their plan. So beware all the enemies of the Lizardmen, for they're coming for you. And that is very much kind of the point in which I imagine Total War Warhammer 2 will pick up in this kind of era of the Lizardmen, with them deciding that, right, now's the time to march upon the world and rid the world of the forces that the old ones had no intention of taking part in our great plan. Now, as for Mazdamundi himself, in terms of what the legendary lord might play like, he of course has his mount, the Stegodon, known as Zlak. And Zlak and Mazdamundi, great pals. Zlak likes just mauling enemies as much as Mazdamundi likes setting them on fire or hitting them with lightning, or just opening up the earth and swallowing them. He also has a magical item known as the Cobra Mace, and it's said that the Cobra Mace is sentient and darts about and really kind of just attacks people on its own. It does magical damage, And it also has this ability, which has come up a couple of times in my Legendary Lords videos, of destroying magical items if it lands a hit on another hero with a magical item. Now, I really don't know if they'll ever be able to implement this. Luckily, I don't think any of the Lords they currently have in the game have ever had this come up as such. But a number of the Lords they haven't put in the game as of yet have this ability, and they haven't really touched on it yet in Total War Warhammer. I don't see them really implementing this rule. They might just have Mazdamundi's thing give him increased melee skill, or maybe even just boost his magic to a certain degree, or give him increased melee defense as kind of a parrying thing. But I don't see them installing something a weapon that would destroy other magical weapons. You never know, they might do it, but it's just not. I don't think it's likely. I don't think it'll be something easy to implement with the game as it's currently laid out. And Mazdamundi, as you might guess, is also a hugely powerful mage. He has access to all 8 laws of magic on the tabletop, as well as the law of high magic, which is also a law that the high elves use. So really, if they're going to make Mazdamundi in the game, Mazdamundi is going to be the highest benchmark of magic user we'll see Total War Warhammer have, I hope. So I'm curious to see what his upgrade tree will look like in Total War Warhammer. The most laws of magic we have on a character so far is Manfred, and they've given him 2 laws of magic. We haven't had someone with 3 laws of magic, let alone all 8 laws of magic. What I'd actually like to see is them give him 4 laws of magic and make them kind of hybridized, or at least give him access to some of the most powerful spells of the 8 laws of magic, and you can upgrade one at a time, because Mazdamundi needs to be just the most kick-ass magic user in the game. That's just what he needs to be. If you're going to do him any justice, Mazdamundi needs to be up there as one of the most powerful magic users in the game, bar none. Mazdamundi. So looking forward to seeing him, and we might have a truly effective magic user in the game coming up. So looking forward to that one. And that about sums it up for Mazdamundi, guys. Really looking forward to him. Thank you guys all for watching this. If you enjoyed this video, please do drop a like. It really helps the channel out. And do subscribe for more Total War Warhammer content. Special thank you out to my patrons, John, Reese, Colin, Thomas, and Mateus. Special thank you to you guys. And I look forward to catching all of you on the next Total War Warhammer video.